Welcome, dear listener, to a story woven with magic and moonlight, a tale meant to carry you gently into the softest realm of sleep. Tonight, we gather beneath invisible stars to remember a hero whose heart was larger than any spell, whose courage outshone the brightest wand light, and whose love changed the very fabric of the wizarding world. This is not a story of great wizards or powerful witches, though they will walk through these pages. No, this is the story of Dobby, a house elf whose loyalty knew no bounds, whose bravery defied ancient magic, and whose acts of kindness rippled through time like gentle waves upon an endless shore. So settle yourself now, dear listener, into the comfort of your bed. Let the weight of the day fall away like autumn leaves drifting to soft earth. Breathe slowly, deeply, and allow yourself to be carried into a world where magic hums in the very air, where portraits whisper in gilded frames, and where even the smallest among us can save the day. Tonight, we will walk beside Dobby through his greatest moments, through warnings given and rescues made, through the journey from servitude to freedom, and finally to a legacy that would never be forgotten. Let us begin where all house elf stories begin, in the ancient and binding magic of service. Long before Dobby would stand on a moonlit beach as a free elf, long before he would press a sock to his chest with trembling fingers, there existed a magic older than Hogwarts itself, older perhaps than wands and spellbooks. This was the magic that bound house elves to wizarding families, a magic woven into the very essence of their being. House elves, you see, were creatures of profound magic, able to apparate within Hogwarts where wizards could not, able to perform wandless magic that would astound even the most accomplished sorcerer. Yet this great power was tethered, bound by invisible chains of enchantment, to serve a master, to obey without question, to punish themselves for even the thought of disobedience. In the grand and cold halls of Malfoy Manor, where peacocks strutted across manicured lawns and dark artifacts whispered from locked rooms, there lived a house elf unlike any other. Dobby was his name, and though he wore the customary pillowcase that marked his servitude, though he spoke of himself in the third person, as all house elves did, there flickered within him something extraordinary, a conscience that would not be silenced, a heart that refused to accept cruelty as natural law. The Malfoy family, ancient and proud, traced their lineage back through centuries of pure-blood wizardry. They had always kept house elves, as was the tradition among old wizarding families. To them, these magical servants were property, no different from the silver in their vaults or the portraits on their walls. Lucius Malfoy, with his long pale hair and cold eyes, walked through his manor as though he owned not just the building, but every living thing within it. His wife Narcissa moved like a ghost through rooms filled with dark elegance, her beauty as icy as frost on winter windows. And their son, Draco, learned from his earliest days that some beings were born to serve and others to be served. But Dobby saw what they could not see. Dobby, who scrubbed their floors until they gleamed like mirrors, who polished their silver until it sang with reflected light, who prepared their meals and tended their fires. Dobby knew the difference between right and wrong, and this knowledge was a terrible burden for a house elf bound to serve a family that walked so often in shadow. The manor itself seemed to breathe with dark magic. In winter, frost painted intricate patterns on the tall windows, and the wind moaned through the grounds like a warning. In summer, The gardens bloomed with flowers that turned their faces away from the house, as if even they knew what secrets lurked within. Dobby moved through these spaces like a whisper, his large tennis ball eyes taking in everything, his bat-like ears catching conversations never meant for him. He heard things, terrible things, whispered in the drawing room late at night. He saw objects cursed and dangerous, hidden in places where even the ministry's auras would never think to look. And Dobby's heart, that enormous heart beating beneath his pillowcase, ached with the knowledge of these things. For house elves, you see, were not supposed to have opinions about their master's dealings. They were not supposed to judge or question. The magic that bound them made disobedience nearly impossible, made even the thought of betrayal a source of physical pain. When Dobby thought things he should not think, when he considered actions he should not take, he felt compelled to punish himself, to iron his hands, to shut his ears in the oven door, to bang his head against walls until stars burst behind his eyes. But still, that small voice of conscience would not be silent. The turning point in Dobby's long servitude came with a name that echoed through the wizarding world like a prayer, like a promise, like a legend come to life. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the child who had survived the killing curse, who had somehow, impossibly, defeated the Dark Lord Voldemort when he was barely more than a baby. In the years that followed that miraculous Halloween night, Harry Potter became more than a person. He became a symbol of hope, of resistance against the darkest magic, of the possibility that love could triumph over hatred. Dobby heard the name Harry Potter spoken in the Malfoy manor with hatred and fear. He heard Lucius Malfoy spit it like a curse, heard him rage about the fall of the Dark Lord, about blood traitors and muggle lovers, about the world that should have been, but was not. And in hearing this hatred, Dobby understood something profound, that Harry Potter must be good, must be worth protecting, must be the very opposite of everything the Malfoys represented. So Dobby began to follow the news of Harry Potter with an attention that would have horrified his masters had they known. When the boy finally came to Hogwarts, when the Daily Prophet carried stories of his adventures, Dobby collected these scraps of information like precious gems, hiding them in the corners of his mind where the Malfoys could not reach. He learned of Harry's bravery, his kindness to those less fortunate, his willingness to stand against injustice. And Dobby's admiration grew into something like love, a pure and devoted love for a boy he had never met, but who represented everything Dobby believed the wizarding world should be. The house elf quarters at Malfoy Manor were not quarters at all, really. Just a cupboard beneath the stairs where Dobby slept on a thin mat, where his few possessions, none really, for house elves owned nothing, were kept. Here, in the darkness, Dobby would lie awake and think about Harry Potter. He would imagine what it might be like to serve such a wizard, to work for someone kind and brave rather than cold and cruel. These thoughts were dangerous, treasonous even, and they caused Dobby such anguish that he would have to punish himself quietly so as not to wake the household. But even pain could not stop Dobby from caring. Even the iron against his skin could not burn away his hope. The magical world Dobby inhabited was one of sharp contrasts, beauty and darkness, wonder and cruelty, all existing side by side. The manor's ballroom, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across marble floors, was just steps away from the dungeons, where prisoners were sometimes kept and tortured. The library, filled with books both wondrous and wicked, stood near the room where Death Eaters once gathered to plot murder and oppression. Dobby cleaned them all, witnessed them all, and kept his silence because he had no choice. Yet within this silence, Dobby's resolve was growing. House elves were not known for their rebellion. Indeed, most thought such a thing impossible. The magic that bound them was supposed to be absolute, unbreakable. But Dobby was discovering that there were cracks in even the oldest magic, that the bindings of servitude could be stretched, if not broken, that a house elf determined enough, brave enough, desperate enough, might find ways to act even against direct orders. It started small. A letter, perhaps, intercepted before it could reach Harry Potter. A warning, overheard, that should have been delivered to the boy who lived. Dobby began to realize that he had access to information that Harry Potter needed, information that could save his life. And with this realization came a terrible decision. Should Dobby obey his masters and remain silent? Or should he betray them to protect the boy who represented everything good in the wizarding world? The very thought of such betrayal made Dobby's magic flare with pain. The bonds of servitude tightened like chains, demanding obedience, punishing even the consideration of disloyalty. Dobby would find himself compelled to bang his head against the manor's stone walls, to beat himself with the fireplace poker, to scream his unworthiness to the empty rooms. The Malfoys, hearing these sounds, would merely laugh or ignore them. Just Dobby being Dobby, the strange house elf who sometimes needed to discipline himself. But they did not know, could not know, that each act of self-punishment was Dobby choosing pain over silence, choosing conscience over comfort, choosing Harry Potter over his own well-being. As the months passed and summer approached, Dobby became aware of a plot, a terrible plot involving Hogwarts and Harry Potter, and an object of dark magic. The details came to him in pieces, a conversation here, a glimpse of something hidden there, the general sense that something wicked was being set in motion. Dobby did not understand all of it, but he understood enough. Harry Potter was in danger. Harry Potter needed to be warned. And Dobby, insignificant Dobby, bound Dobby, powerless Dobby, was the only one who knew. The decision, when it finally crystallized in Dobby's mind, was both terrifying and liberating. He would leave Malfoy Manor. He would find Harry Potter. He would deliver his warning, even if it meant punishment beyond anything he had ever endured, even if it meant his own destruction. Because some things, Dobby was discovering, were more important than obedience. Some things were worth any price. And so, on a warm summer night, when the Malfoys were away and the manor lay quiet beneath the stars, Dobby made his preparations. He did not pack. House elves owned nothing to pack. He did not say goodbye. There was no one who would miss him. He simply closed his enormous eyes, focused his considerable magic, and apparated away from the only home he had ever known, toward a destiny he could not predict, toward a meeting that would change everything. The magic of apparition carried Dobby across the distance in an instant, folding space like paper, delivering him to a place he had never been but had learned about through careful listening and desperate research. Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey, the address where Harry Potter lived with Muggles. where the great wizard spent his summers away from the magical world. As Dobby materialized in the warm darkness of a summer night, standing in the garden of a perfectly ordinary house on a perfectly ordinary street, his heart was beating like a drum. He was so far from Malfoy Manor now, so far from the reach of his masters. But the magical bonds that held him had not broken. They had merely stretched, and they pulled at him with increasing pain, demanding his return, punishing his absence. But Dobby did not return. Not yet. Instead, he looked up at the dark windows of number 4, Privet Drive, and gathered his courage. Somewhere in that house, Harry Potter was sleeping, unaware of the danger that awaited him, unaware that a house elf had crossed the boundaries of servitude itself to bring him warning. This, dear listener, was where it all began. This was the first time Dobby would save the day, though not the last. This was the moment when a bound house elf became something more, a friend, a hero, a being of such loyalty and courage that his name would be remembered long after greater wizards were forgotten. And so, our story truly begins, with Dobby standing in a muggle garden, trembling with fear and determination, about to change the course of history with nothing but his enormous heart and his unshakable belief that Harry Potter must be saved. Breathe deeply now, dear listener, and let yourself sink a little further into comfort, into rest, into the gentle embrace of this story. We left Dobby standing in a muggle garden on a warm summer night, his heart full of determination, his resolve stronger than the magical bonds that demanded his return to Malfoy Manor. Tonight, we follow him into that fateful meeting, into the bedroom where Harry Potter slept, unaware that his life was about to be touched by the purest form of loyalty the wizarding world had ever known. The garden at number 4, Privet Drive, was meticulously maintained, as were all the gardens on this street where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. The hedges were trimmed with geometric precision, the lawn mowed in perfect stripes, the flowers planted in neat, approved colors. It was a place designed to attract no attention, to conform, to blend seamlessly into the suburban landscape. And yet, standing in the shadows beneath a carefully pruned tree, there was a house elf, a being of profound magic in a place that denied magic's very existence. Dobby's large tennis ball eyes reflected the streetlights as he gazed up at the house. He could feel Harry Potter's presence, could sense the magical signature that marked the boy who lived, even though it was muffled somehow, suppressed by the very ordinariness of this place. Dobby knew from whispered conversations overheard at the manor that Harry was kept here by powerful protective magic, that these muggle relatives provided a kind of shield, however unwelcoming they might be. But protection from one danger did not mean safety from all dangers, and Dobby knew what awaited Harry if he returned to Hogwarts. The house elf moved through the garden with a silence that even the gentlest breeze could not match. His bare feet made no sound on the grass. His pillowcase did not rustle. He was a creature made for serving, for moving unseen and unheard through the spaces where wizards lived, and these skills served him well now as he approached the house. The magical bonds that connected him to the Malfoys pulled and burned, demanding his return. But Dobby had come too far to turn back now. He had made his choice, and he would see it through, no matter the cost. With a soft pop that was barely louder than a soap bubble bursting, Dobby apparated directly into Harry Potter's bedroom. House elves, you see, possessed magic that allowed them to go where wizards could not, to bypass wards and protections that would stop the most powerful sorcerers. It was one of the great ironies of their servitude. They wielded such extraordinary power, yet were bound to use it only in service to others. The bedroom was small and neat, with bars on the window and a distinct feeling of confinement. Dobby's eyes, accustomed to seeing in darkness, took in every detail. The school trunk at the foot of the bed, the Hedwig's empty cage, the books stacked carefully on a desk, and there, in the bed, lay Harry Potter himself, sleeping peacefully, his famous scar hidden beneath unruly black hair, his face relaxed in the innocence of dreams. For a long moment, Dobby simply stood there, trembling with the magnitude of what he was doing. Here was the wizard he had admired from afar, the boy who had defeated the Dark Lord, the symbol of everything good in the magical world. And Dobby, insignificant Dobby, had come to warn him, to protect him, to save him from the plot that was being woven in the shadows. But how to begin? How to wake a sleeping wizard and explain the unexplainable? Dobby wrung his hands together, his long fingers twisting anxiously. He knew that he could not tell Harry everything. The magical bonds of servitude prevented him from directly betraying his master's secrets. But he could warn, he could hint, he could do something to prevent Harry from returning to Hogwarts, where terrible danger awaited. As if sensing a presence, Harry stirred in his sleep, and then his eyes opened. For a moment, there was confusion, then shock, as he saw a strange creature standing at the foot of his bed, watching him with enormous, sorrowful eyes that gleamed like moons in the darkness. What followed was a conversation that would change both their lives forever. Dobby introduced himself, his voice high and trembling with emotion. He spoke of the great Harry Potter, of his fame, of his kindness and bravery. And Harry, still half asleep and utterly bewildered, tried to understand why a house elf was in his bedroom in the middle of the night, speaking of him as though he was some kind of hero. Dobby's warning came tumbling out in a rush of words punctuated by gestures and anxious movements. Harry Potter must not return to Hogwarts. Terrible things were planned. There would be danger, perhaps even death. The plot had been laid during the summer, and if Harry went back to school, he would be walking straight into a trap. Dobby could not say more. The magical bonds prevented him, caused him such pain that he had to punish himself right there in Harry's bedroom, banging his head against the window, much to Harry's horror and distress. Harry, kind-hearted even in his confusion, tried to stop Dobby from hurting himself, tried to understand what this strange creature was trying to tell him. But Dobby could only repeat his warning, growing more desperate as Harry insisted he had to return to Hogwarts, that the school was his home, the only real home he had ever known. The house elf's heart broke a little more with each of Harry's protestations. Did the boy not understand? Did he not see that Dobby was trying to save his life, even at the cost of his own well-being? When it became clear that Harry would not agree to stay away from Hogwarts, Dobby made a decision that would have consequences neither of them could predict. If Harry would not stay away willingly, then Dobby would have to make it impossible for him to return. It was for Harry's own good, Dobby told himself, even as guilt and desperation warred within him. He would stop Harry from going back to school, would prevent him from walking into danger, no matter what it took. The house elf disappeared with a crack, leaving Harry confused and disturbed. But that was not the end of Dobby's intervention. Oh no, dear listener, it was merely the beginning. For Dobby had set in motion a plan, a desperate plan to keep Harry Potter safe by keeping him away from Hogwarts entirely. The days that followed were a torment for both Harry and Dobby, though in different ways. Harry, imprisoned in his bedroom by his uncle after a disastrous pudding incident involving Dobby's magic, watched summer pass beyond his barred window, watched as letters from his friends went unanswered. He did not know that Dobby had been intercepting those letters, hiding them away so that Harry would think his friends had forgotten him, so that he would feel unwelcome in the wizarding world and choose to stay in the Muggle world where he was safe. Dobby, meanwhile, suffered terribly for his disobedience. Each act against his master's interests brought waves of magical punishment. The bonds of servitude burned and constricted, demanding he return to the manor, demanding he cease his interference. Dobby had to punish himself constantly, brutally, to satisfy the magical compulsion. He ironed his hands until they blistered, shut his ears indoors until they rang with pain, banged his head against walls until stars burst behind his eyes. But still, he continued, because Harry Potter's life was worth more than Dobby's suffering. Harry Potter's safety was worth any price. The house elf even went so far as to seal the magical barrier at King's Cross Station, preventing Harry and his friend from passing through to platform 9 and 10 3/4. It was a desperate, reckless act, one that required tremendous magical power and brought Dobby such anguish that he could barely stand. But if it kept Harry from boarding the Hogwarts Express, if it kept him from returning to school where danger awaited, then it was worth it. Except, of course, that Harry Potter was nothing, if not determined. The boy who lived did not give up easily, did not turn back when faced with obstacles. Instead, he found another way. A flying car, enchanted by Arthur Weasley, that carried him and his friend Ron all the way to Hogwarts, bypassing the blocked barrier entirely. When Dobby learned of this, learned that Harry had made it to school despite everything, the house elf's despair was absolute. He had failed. He had tried so hard, suffered so much, and still Harry Potter had walked straight into danger. But let us not dwell on despair, dear listener. Let us instead consider the beauty of Dobby's intentions, the purity of his heart, the extraordinary courage it took for a bound house elf to defy his masters, even indirectly, even through methods that skirted the edges of what his magical bonds would allow. Dobby had risked everything for a wizard he barely knew, a wizard who had shown him no kindness, who owed him nothing. This was love in its most selfless form, loyalty given freely where no loyalty was demanded. Through the autumn months, as the Chamber of Secrets opened and terror spread through Hogwarts, Dobby continued his desperate attempts to protect Harry. He appeared in the hospital wing after Harry's arm had been broken, warning again, begging again, even admitting that he had been the one to seal the barrier at the station. Harry, injured and frustrated, could not understand why this house elf cared so much, could not see that Dobby's interference, however misguided, came from a place of pure devotion. There was a Quidditch match, you see, where Dobby's desperation reached new heights. A bludger, one of the heavy iron balls used in the magical sport, had been enchanted to chase Harry relentlessly, to injure him seriously enough that he would have to be sent home, away from Hogwarts, away from danger. Dobby had done this, had used his magic to curse the bludger, hoping that injury would succeed where warnings had failed. The house elf watched from the stands, hidden among the crowds, his heart in his throat, as the bludger pursued Harry through the air. He watched as Harry dodged and weaved, as the ball smashed into him again and again with sickening force. He watched as Harry, determined even in the face of injury, caught the golden snitch, even as the bludger broke his arm. And Dobby's admiration for the boy who lived grew even stronger, even as his guilt for causing that injury ate at him like acid. When a well-meaning but incompetent teacher vanished all the bones in Harry's arm, trying to heal the break, Dobby appeared at Harry's bedside once more. He confessed his role in the bludger incident, his voice breaking with remorse and desperation. He had only wanted to save Harry, to protect him, to send him home where he would be safe. But Harry Potter would not be driven away. Harry Potter would stay at Hogwarts, would face the danger, would stand firm against whatever darkness was rising. And in that moment, dear listener, Dobby began to understand something profound. He had been trying to save Harry by keeping him away from Hogwarts, but perhaps that was not what Harry needed. Perhaps true safety did not come from running away, but from facing danger with courage, with friends beside you, with love to shield you. Perhaps Dobby's role was not to prevent Harry from fighting, but to help him survive the battle. The year wore on, and the Chamber of Secrets claimed victim after victim, petrifying students with the gaze of an ancient monster. Dobby watched from the shadows, his heart breaking for those who fell, his guilt growing heavier. He knew where the danger came from, knew the object that was causing all this terror, but the magical bonds prevented him from speaking plainly, from simply telling Harry what he needed to know. All Dobby could do was offer cryptic hints, vague warnings, desperate attempts to point Harry in the right direction without directly betraying his master's secrets. But Harry was clever, braver than Dobby had even imagined, and he pursued the mystery with a determination that both terrified and inspired the watching house elf. He uncovered the truth about the chamber, about the basilisk that lurked within it, about the diary that held a fragment of the Dark Lord's soul. And when Harry descended into the chamber to save a girl's life, Dobby could only watch and hope and pray to whatever magic governed the universe that the boy who lived would live once more. The battle in the Chamber of Secrets was beyond Dobby's sight, but the house elf felt its echoes in the very stones of Hogwarts. He felt the moment when Harry destroyed the diary, felt the dark magic dissipate like smoke in wind. And then came the aftermath, came the revelations that would lead to the most important moment in Dobby's long life of servitude. For you see, dear listener, when Lucius Malfoy came to Hogwarts in fury, demanding to speak with Dumbledore, demanding answers about how his property, a diary he had planted on a student to reopen the chamber, had been destroyed, he brought with him a house elf who trailed behind him like a shadow, Dobby, who had been commanded to accompany his master, who walked with his head bowed and his heart heavy, following a wizard he served but could no longer respect. In a corridor of Hogwarts, Harry Potter confronted Lucius Malfoy. The boy had figured it out, had understood that Malfoy had slipped the cursed diary into Ginny Weasley's cauldron at the beginning of the year, had set in motion all the terror that followed. And in that confrontation, in that moment of accusation and anger, Harry Potter did something extraordinary. He took the destroyed diary, the ruined book that had held such dark magic, and he placed within its pages a sock, a simple, ordinary sock. And then he handed it to Lucius Malfoy with a look that said he knew exactly what he was doing. Malfoy, disgusted by what he thought was a worthless, filthy object, threw the diary aside without thinking. He threw it to Dobby, commanded him to take it, to dispose of it. And Dobby caught the diary with the sock inside, caught the gift that Harry Potter had so cleverly hidden within it. Dobby stood there, trembling, holding the ruined diary with a sock tucked inside its pages. His enormous eyes grew even wider as understanding dawned, as the significance of what he held penetrated through years of conditioning and servitude. A sock. Master had given Dobby a sock. Master had given Dobby clothes. In the ancient magic that bound house elves to wizarding families, there existed one singular pathway to freedom, one escape from eternal servitude. If a master gave their house elf clothes, really gave them, presented them as a gift rather than as a uniform of service, then the magical bonds would break. The enchantments that had held for generations would dissolve like morning mist, and the house elf would be free. Lucius Malfoy realized his mistake in the same instant that Dobby understood his freedom. The pure-blood wizard's face contorted with fury and disgust as he watched his house elf pull the sock from the diary, watched Dobby's expression transform from habitual fear to wonder, from servitude to liberation. Malfoy raised his wand, rage making his movements sharp and dangerous, and in that moment he would have cursed Harry Potter, would have hurt the boy who had just freed his property. But Dobby was free now, free, and a free house elf was no longer bound to stand aside while his former master committed violence. The magic that had prevented Dobby from acting against Malfoy interests no longer constrained him. The chains had fallen away, and in their place was something glorious and terrible. The full force of a house elf's power, directed by choice rather than command. "You shall not harm Harry Potter," Dobby said, and his voice, usually so high and tremulous, carried a note of absolute authority that echoed off the stone walls. With a gesture, with barely a thought, Dobby sent Lucius Malfoy flying backward down the corridor, the powerful wizard tumbling like a leaf in a storm before the magic of a freed house elf. Malfoy scrambled to his feet and fled, his robes billowing behind him, his face twisted with impotent rage. And Dobby stood there in the aftermath, clutching his sock, trembling not with fear now, but with the overwhelming rush of freedom. Harry Potter watched this transformation with amazement and joy. He had suspected what might happen when he tricked Malfoy into giving Dobby clothes. But to see it unfold, to witness the moment of liberation, filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with simple human and house elf dignity. Dobby turned to Harry, and tears were streaming down his face, tears of joy so pure and profound that they seemed to shimmer with their own light. The house elf had served the Malfoy family for generations, had known nothing but their cruelty, their casual dismissal of his pain, their assumption that he existed only to serve their needs. And now, in a single moment of cleverness and compassion, Harry Potter had given him what Dobby had never dared to dream of: freedom. Harry Potter freed Dobby, the elf cried, his voice breaking with emotion. Harry Potter set Dobby free. And there, in that corridor, where portraits watched with painted eyes and magical light flickered from enchanted torches, Dobby made a promise. He would never forget this gift. He would never forget Harry Potter's kindness. He would spend the rest of his life honoring this freedom, using it to help others, to stand against the darkness that still lurked in the wizarding world. Harry Potter had saved him, and Dobby would save Harry Potter in return, again and again, for as long as breath remained in his small body. But freedom, dear listener, is not always simple. Freedom, after a lifetime of servitude, can be as frightening as it is wonderful. As Dobby left Hogwarts that day, still clutching his precious sock, he faced a question that no house elf in his family line had ever needed to answer. What does a free house elf do? The months that followed were a time of discovery and adjustment of joy mixed with uncertainty. Dobby found that freedom meant making choices, and choices required knowing what you wanted, who you were beyond the identity of servant. He had to learn to speak in the first person, to say I instead of Dobby, though old habits proved difficult to break. He had to decide where to go, what to do, how to spend the hours that had once belonged entirely to his masters. Dobby wandered for a time, exploring the wizarding world with the wonder of someone seeing it truly for the first time. He visited Diagon Alley and marveled at the shops, at the wizards and witches going about their business, at the freedom of movement that he had never known. He went to Hogsmeade and walked through the village, tasting butterbeer and watching students from Hogwarts enjoy their outings. Everything seemed brighter somehow, more vivid, as though freedom had given him new eyes with which to see the world. But freedom also meant loneliness. House elves were social creatures, accustomed to being part of a household, to having purpose and routine. Dobby found that he missed having tasks to complete, missed the rhythm of service, even if he did not miss the cruelty that had accompanied it. He tried offering his services to various wizarding families, but his desire for wages, for payment for his work, which was unheard of for house elves, made him seem strange, almost mad in the eyes of traditional wizards. Most house elves, you see, considered the idea of payment to be shameful, a sign that their service was not given freely out of love and loyalty, but was being sold like common labor. Dobby's fellow house elves looked at him with pity and confusion when he spoke of wanting wages, of wanting to be paid for his work. They could not understand why freedom was desirable, why anyone would want to break the ancient bonds that gave their lives structure and meaning. But Dobby understood something that they did not. He understood that service given freely, chosen rather than compelled, was more valuable than any service demanded by magical bonds. He understood that wages meant respect, meant acknowledgement that his work had worth, that he was not merely property but a being deserving of fair treatment. These ideas were revolutionary in the house elf world, and they made Dobby an outcast among his own kind, even as they filled him with quiet pride. The turning point came when Dobby heard that Hogwarts was seeking house elves to work in the castle kitchens. The school employed dozens of house elves, all bound to the institution itself rather than to individual families, all working tirelessly to feed the students and maintain the castle. Dobby made his way back to the place where he had gained his freedom, his heart full of hope. Albus Dumbledore, the wise and kindly headmaster, received Dobby in his office, that circular room filled with silver instruments and sleeping portraits, where Fawkes the Phoenix dozed on his perch and magic hummed in the very air. Dumbledore listened to Dobby's unusual request with twinkling eyes and a gentle smile. The house elf wanted to work at Hogwarts, yes, but he wanted wages. He wanted payment for his labor, and he wanted time off, a day each week to do as he pleased, to continue experiencing the freedom that Harry Potter had given him. Other wizards would have laughed at such requests, would have dismissed Dobby as addled or ungrateful. But Dumbledore was not other wizards. He understood that Dobby represented something important, something new in the wizarding world, the possibility that house elves could be more than servants, could be employees, could be treated with dignity and respect while still doing the work they found fulfilling. And so an agreement was reached. Dobby would work in the Hogwarts kitchens, would receive 1 galleon a week in wages, a fortune to a house elf who had never owned anything, and would have 1 day off each month. It was far less than human workers would receive, but it was revolutionary for a house elf, and Dobby accepted these terms with tears of gratitude streaming down his face. The other house elves at Hogwarts were horrified. They whispered about Dobby when he first arrived, this strange free elf who wore mismatched socks and spoke of wages with pride. They considered him a disgrace to house elf dignity, a poor creature who had been corrupted by his freedom. Chief among his critics was Winky, a house elf who had recently been dismissed from her own position with the Crouch family, who wore shame and despair like a cloak and drowned her sorrows in butterbeer. But Dobby did not let their disapproval dim his joy. He threw himself into his work with an enthusiasm that even the traditional house elves had to admire. He cleaned the kitchens until they gleamed like mirrors, polished the copper pots until they shone like suns, prepared meals with such care and attention that even the pickiest students found nothing to complain about. And he did all this not because magical bonds compelled him, not because punishment awaited if he failed, but because he chose to, because he took pride in work done well, because serving others was something he genuinely loved when it was done freely. The Hogwarts kitchens became Dobby's new home, a vast underground chamber filled with warmth and wonderful smells, where great fireplaces roared and cooking magic filled the air with delicious aromas. Here, among the steaming pots and fresh-baked bread, among the other house elves who slowly, grudgingly, began to accept his presence, Dobby found a kind of peace he had never known at Malfoy Manor. He made a special friend in Winky, despite her initial disdain for his freedom. The poor house elf was drowning in grief and shame, unable to accept her dismissal, unable to find purpose without a master to serve. Dobby sat with her during his days off, brought her tea and spoke gently about freedom and choice and the possibility of a happiness beyond servitude. Winky did not want to hear it, not at first, but Dobby's persistent kindness began to work on her like water on stone, slowly wearing away the rigid beliefs that bound her. And always, always, Dobby thought of Harry Potter. The boy came to visit him sometimes in the kitchens, and these visits filled Dobby with such joy that he would spend hours afterward recounting every word, every gesture, every small kindness. Harry Potter, who had freed him, who had given him this new life, who remained the greatest wizard in Dobby's eyes regardless of what anyone else might say. Dobby decorated his small corner of the house elf quarters with items that celebrated his freedom. The sock that Harry had given him, framed and hanging on the wall like a precious work of art, a miniature painting of Harry Potter, done by Dobby himself, with more enthusiasm than skill, a collection of hats and scarves and other garments that Hermione Granger had begun leaving around the castle in an attempt to trick house elves into picking them up and becoming free. The other house elves refused to clean Gryffindor Tower because of these hidden clothes, but Dobby collected them all with delight, wearing layers upon layers of mismatched knitwear with immense pride. The seasons turned, and Dobby settled into his new life. He learned the rhythms of the school year, the way the castle changed with the weather, the different personalities of the students who sometimes found their way to the kitchens seeking midnight snacks or comfort food. He watched Harry Potter from afar, always ready to help if needed, always vigilant for any sign of danger to the boy who had given him everything. There were challenges, of course. Freedom meant responsibility, meant making mistakes and living with their consequences. Dobby sometimes struggled with knowing when to help and when to step back, when his intervention was welcome and when it was intrusion. He had to learn that protecting someone did not mean controlling their choices, that love sometimes meant allowing people to face danger, because facing danger was part of growing strong. But through it all, through every difficulty and every joy, Dobby held fast to the gift that Harry Potter had given him. He held fast to his freedom, wore it like armor against the darkness that still lurked in the wizarding world. And he prepared himself, though he did not know it yet, for the times ahead when that freedom would allow him to save the day in ways that a bound house elf never could. For you see, dear listener, Dobby's story was far from over. His greatest acts of heroism were yet to come. His most important rescues still lay ahead in the future. But first, he needed this time of peace, this season of learning what it meant to be free, to be valued, to be more than property. He needed to grow into his freedom the way a plant grows toward the sun, slowly but surely, developing the strength that would one day save lives. The Hogwarts kitchens, filled with the sound of Dobby's laughter now, with his cheerful greetings to the students who visited, with his enthusiastic declarations of loyalty to Harry Potter that made the other house elves roll their eyes, but also perhaps smile just a little. Here was a free elf, strange and proud and utterly devoted to the wizard who had liberated him. Here was proof that the old ways could change, that ancient magic could be overcome, that love freely given was stronger than any bond of servitude. And as the seasons turned and winter gave way to spring, spring to summer, summer to autumn again, Dobby prepared himself without knowing it for the next time Harry Potter would need him, for the next time danger would come calling, for the next opportunity to save the day and honor the greatest gift he had ever received. Drift deeper now, dear listener, into this gentle story that carries you like a leaf upon a peaceful stream. Let the world beyond these words fade into softness. Let your muscles release their hold on the day and allow yourself to be carried into the magical halls of Hogwarts, where a free house elf was building a life more wonderful than he had ever imagined possible. Tonight, we walk beside Dobby through his days of service chosen rather than commanded, through friendships forged and kindnesses given, through the simple joy of work done well, because one wishes to do it. The Hogwarts kitchens existed in a state of perpetual organized chaos, a vast underground chamber that mirrored the great hall above it, with 4 long tables positioned exactly where the house tables sat in the hall overhead. Here, magic and mundane work blended seamlessly, Self-stirring cauldrons bubbled beside house elves, chopping vegetables with remarkable speed. Enchanted knives diced alongside skilled hands, and the air was always thick with the mingled scents of baking bread, roasting meats, simmering soups, and sweet desserts in various stages of creation. Dobby threw himself into this world with an enthusiasm that astounded even the most dedicated house elves. He arrived early each morning, before the first light of dawn crept through the high windows of the castle, and he worked until late into the evening, long after the students had finished their dinners and retired to their common rooms. But this was not the desperate, fearful labor of servitude. This was the joyful work of someone who had chosen their path, who took pride in every perfectly polished pot, every meal served exactly right, every task completed to the highest standard. The other house elves watched this free elf with a mixture of bewilderment and grudging respect. There was something almost scandalous about Dobby's approach to work. He smiled too much, laughed too loudly, and the worst of all, he wore clothes. Not the traditional pillowcase or tea towel that marked proper house elf attire, but actual clothes. Mismatched socks in garish colors, each foot sporting a different pattern. A maroon sweater with holes in the elbows, over which he wore a tea cozy as a hat. Scarves in clashing hues wrapped around his neck. Shorts that didn't quite match anything else he wore. He looked, the other house elves whispered, utterly ridiculous. But Dobby wore his freedom on his body like armor, and he refused to feel shame for it. Each article of clothing was a reminder that he was no longer property, that he had rights and choices and dignity. The socks especially. He collected them now. Dozens of pairs in every color and pattern imaginable, and he wore different ones each day, taking immense pleasure in selecting which ones to put on each morning. The original sock, the one Harry Potter had given him, remained carefully preserved in a small box beside his sleeping mat, too precious to wear, too important to risk damaging. Among the house elves, Dobby gradually found his place, though it was not always easy. There was a hierarchy in the kitchens, unspoken but understood, based on years of service and adherence to traditional values. Dobby, with his wages and his day off and his loud proclamations about freedom, disrupted this hierarchy simply by existing. Some house elves avoided him entirely, considering him a corrupting influence. Others engaged with him warily, curious despite themselves about this strange free elf who seemed so happy. But it was Winky who became Dobby's closest companion in those early days of his employment at Hogwarts. Poor Winky, who had been dismissed from the Crouch family under circumstances both tragic and humiliating, who wore her shame like a shroud and could not stop mourning the loss of her servitude. When Dobby first encountered her in the kitchens, she was huddled in a corner, tears streaming down her face, a bottle of butterbeer clutched in her small hands. For she had discovered that drinking helped numb the pain of her dismissal, helped her forget that she was a house elf without a family to serve. Dobby's heart broke for her. He understood the pain of serving cruel masters. He had lived it for years, but he also understood the liberation that came with freedom. He tried to talk to Winky about it, tried to show her that being free did not mean being worthless, that they could find purpose and pride in work they chose to do. But Winky would not listen, not at first. She buried her face in her tiny hands and sobbed that Dobby was wrong, that house elves needed masters, that freedom was a curse rather than a blessing. Still, Dobby persisted. He sat with Winky during mealtimes, brought her tea when she looked particularly desolate, spoke gently about his own experiences at Hogwarts. He told her about Harry Potter, about the gift of freedom, about the joy of choosing one's own path. And slowly, gradually, like ice thawing in spring, Winky began to soften. She still drank too much butterbeer, still wept for her lost position, but she also began to talk to Dobby, to ask him questions about his work, to show the faintest glimmers of interest in something beyond her grief. The other house elves at Hogwarts were a diverse group, each with their own personality and quirks, though most were too traditional to show much individuality. There was an elderly elf who had worked at Hogwarts for over a century, who had served countless headmasters and knew the castle's secrets better than any living wizard. There were younger elves, energetic and eager, who could prepare a feast for hundreds in mere hours without breaking a sweat. There were elves who specialized in certain tasks, baking, cleaning, laundering, and took fierce pride in their particular skills. Dobby learned from all of them, absorbing their knowledge and techniques while maintaining his own unique approach to work. He learned the castle's rhythms, the way different seasons required different preparations, the special dietary needs of various students, the professors' preferences for their meals. He learned which corridors were warmest in winter, which shortcuts led where, which portraits were gossipy, and which kept their painted silence. Hogwarts became not just a workplace, but a home in the truest sense, a place where he belonged, where his efforts mattered, where he was valued. The students, when they discovered the kitchens, were always delighted to find Dobby there. He had become something of a legend among those who knew his story. The house elf who had been freed by Harry Potter, who wore ridiculous clothes and asked for wages and spoke of his freedom with undisguised pride. They came seeking midnight snacks and stayed to talk with him, to hear his enthusiastic praise of Harry Potter, to marvel at his enormous eyes and his even more enormous heart. Dobby treated every student with the same careful courtesy, but there were some he held in special regard. Harry Potter, of course, above all others. Whenever Harry visited the kitchens, Dobby's joy was so profound that the other house elves had to work around him as he wept and exclaimed and offered Harry every food item within reach. Ron Weasley, Harry's loyal friend, who always ate with such appreciation that it made Dobby proud of every dish he helped prepare, and Hermione Granger, who cared so deeply about house elf rights that she had formed an organization dedicated to their liberation, even though most house elves found her efforts more alarming than helpful. Hermione's campaign for house elf rights was a source of both pride and embarrassment for Dobby. She had taken to knitting hats and scarves and socks, leaving them hidden around Gryffindor Tower in hopes that house elves would pick them up and thus be freed from servitude. The other house elves, horrified by this trap, refused to clean Gryffindor Tower at all, considering it disrespectful and insulting. But Dobby collected every single item Hermione made, wearing them in layers, storing them carefully, treasuring each one as a symbol that someone cared about house elf welfare. He tried to explain to Hermione that most house elves did not want freedom, that they found happiness in service, that forcing liberation upon them was not kindness. But he also thanked her for caring, for seeing house elves as beings deserving of rights and dignity, for trying to make the wizarding world a better place. It was complicated, This intersection of good intentions and cultural misunderstanding. But Dobby navigated it with his characteristic optimism and grace. The passage of seasons brought different rhythms to the castle. Autumn meant the arrival of new students, the sorting ceremony, the excitement of a new school year beginning. Dobby helped prepare the welcome feast, taking special pride in the mountains of food that appeared on the house tables, knowing that his work contributed to the magic and wonder that made Hogwarts special. Winter brought snow and cold, and the kitchens became even warmer and more welcoming, filled with a sense of holiday cooking and the preparation of special feasts for Christmas and New Year. Spring meant lighter fare, fresh vegetables from the Hogwarts greenhouses, meals that celebrated the return of warmth and growth. And summer, when most students had gone home, meant quieter days with smaller meals to prepare. Time for deep cleaning and repairs, for the house elves to rest and prepare for the next year's arrivals. Through it all, Dobby worked and learned and grew, becoming more confident in his freedom, more certain of his place in this magical world. His wages, that 1 galleon per week, that seemed like a fortune to a being who had never owned anything, accumulated slowly in a small cloth bag that Dobby kept hidden in his corner of the house elf quarters. He did not need to spend much. Hogwarts provided food and shelter, and most of his clothes came from Hermione's knitting. But having money of his own filled him with a quiet pride. Sometimes he would count his coins late at night, running his long fingers over the gold, marveling that these belonged to him, that he had earned them through his labor, that they represented his worth as a worker rather than as property. His day off each month was a treasure beyond price. Dobby used these precious hours to explore the world beyond Hogwarts, to visit Hogsmeade and wander through the magical village, to stand on hillsides and simply breathe the free air, knowing he could go where he pleased without asking permission, without fearing punishment. Sometimes he visited the place where he had first warned Harry Potter, standing in the Muggle garden at Privet Drive and remembering the terror and determination that had driven him to betray his masters. Sometimes he simply stayed at Hogwarts, exploring corners of the castle he had never had time to see, talking to portraits, befriending the ghosts, learning the 1,000 small secrets that made the school so magical. Through all of this, Dobby remained vigilant for any sign that Harry Potter might need him. He listened to gossip among the portraits, paid attention to whispers among the students, kept his enormous ears open for any hint of danger or difficulty. Harry Potter had given him freedom, and Dobby would spend the rest of his life ready to repay that debt, ready to save the day whenever the opportunity arose. The other house elves gradually came to accept Dobby's presence, even if they never fully understood his choices. They saw that he worked as hard as any of them, that his enthusiasm for his tasks was genuine, that his strange clothes and wages did not prevent him from being an excellent house elf in all the ways that mattered. Some even began to speak to him with something approaching friendship, asking his advice on particularly difficult stains or complicated recipes, acknowledging that freedom had not made him lazy or worthless as they had feared. And Winky, dear troubled Winky, slowly began to heal under Dobby's patient friendship. She drank less butterbeer, wept less frequently, and sometimes, just sometimes, she would smile at one of Dobby's enthusiastic declarations or laugh at his mismatched socks. She was not ready for freedom herself, might never be ready, but she was learning to live with her dismissal, learning to find purpose in her work at Hogwarts, even without a family to serve. And much of that healing came from Dobby's unwavering kindness, his refusal to give up on her, his demonstration that house elves could survive and even thrive outside the bonds of traditional servitude. The castle itself seemed to embrace Dobby as one of its own. The portraits greeted him as he passed. The ghosts included him in their conversations. Even Peeves, the poltergeist, treated him with a modicum of respect. Dobby belonged to Hogwarts now, as much a part of the castle as the moving staircases and the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall. He had found his place in the world, had built a life of purpose and dignity, had proven that freedom was not something to fear, but something to celebrate. And yet, even in his happiness, even in the peace of his daily routines and the warmth of friendship, Dobby remained always ready to help, ready to serve, not because he must, but because he chose to, ready to save the day whenever Harry Potter or anyone else needed him. For this was who Dobby was, a house elf who understood that true service came from the heart, that real loyalty could only be given freely, that the greatest magic in the world was the magic of choosing to help others, even when no one commanded it. Breathe slowly now, dear listener, and let yourself sink even deeper into this tale of loyalty and courage. The night deepens around you, soft and welcoming, and in this quiet darkness, we return to Dobby's story, to a time when his freedom would allow him to save Harry Potter in a way no bound house elf ever could. Tonight, we witness the Triwizard Tournament, ancient magic and deadly challenges, and a house elf's determination to protect the wizard who had given him everything. The year that the Triwizard Tournament came to Hogwarts, the castle buzzed with an excitement that had not been felt in generations. This legendary competition, which brought together 3 schools of magic in a test of courage and skill, had not been held in over a century due to the dangerous nature of its tasks. But now it had returned, and with it came students from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang, their presence filling Hogwarts with new energy, new languages, new forms of magic. Dobby watched the preparations with his characteristic enthusiasm, helping the other house elves prepare feasts grand enough to impress the visiting schools, polishing the Great Hall until it gleamed like a jewel, ensuring that every detail was perfect for the arrival of the foreign delegations. He felt proud to be part of Hogwarts during such an important time, proud that his work would contribute to the castle's hospitality and honor. The Goblet of Fire chose its champions amid great ceremony and anticipation. Victor Krum from Durmstrang, a Quidditch celebrity whose very presence made students whisper and point. Fleur Delacour from Beauxbatons, beautiful and proud, part Veela with magic that shimmered around her like heat waves. Cedric Diggory from Hogwarts itself, popular and talented, a credit to Hufflepuff House. These 3 would compete in the tournament, would face challenges designed to test the limits of their magical abilities. But then, impossibly, the goblet produced a 4th name, Harry Potter. The boy who lived, barely 14 years old, somehow entered into a competition meant for students of age, bound by a magical contract to compete, despite his protests that he had not put his name forward. The entire castle erupted in confusion and controversy, some believing Harry had found a way to trick the age line, others sensing darker forces at work. Dobby knew with absolute certainty that Harry Potter had not entered himself. Harry Potter was brave but not foolish, talented but not arrogant enough to risk his life for glory he did not seek. Someone had entered Harry's name, someone with ill intent, someone who meant the boy harm, and Dobby, free to act according to his own conscience, determined that he would watch over Harry throughout this tournament, would do whatever he could to help his friend survive the deadly tasks ahead. The first task came quickly, a challenge involving dragons, magnificent, terrifying creatures that could kill a wizard with a single blast of flame. Dobby watched from the shadows as Harry faced a Hungarian horntail, as the young wizard used his flying skills to retrieve a golden egg as he survived through courage and quick thinking. Dobby's heart had been in his throat throughout the task, his hands clasped together so tightly that his long fingers ached. But Harry had prevailed, had proven himself worthy of competing alongside wizards several years his senior. The golden egg, when opened, released a terrible shrieking wail that seemed meaningless, a puzzle that the champions would need to solve to prepare for the second task. Dobby heard the students talking about it, heard them speculate about what the egg might mean, what the next challenge might involve. And Dobby listened, his large ears catching every whisper, every theory, every scrap of information that might help Harry Potter. Winter settled over Hogwarts like a blanket of white, and the castle prepared for the Yule Ball, a traditional part of the tournament that required the champions to open the dancing. Dobby helped prepare for this grand event, though his thoughts remained focused on Harry and the mysterious second task. He knew it would involve the large lake that bordered the school grounds. The mer-people who lived in its depths had been consulted. Arrangements had been made, though the details were kept secret from all but the organizers. It was through the portraits that Dobby learned more, through his friendship with the painted figures who saw everything that happened in the castle. They whispered to him about conversations overheard, about champions visiting the prefect's bathroom, where the golden egg's message could be heard properly underwater, about the nature of the task that awaited. The champions would have 1 hour to retrieve something precious that had been taken from them, something hidden in the depths of the lake among the mer-people's village. Dobby's concern deepened. The lake was dangerous, cold and dark, filled with creatures both magical and mundane. Harry Potter would need to survive underwater for an hour, would need to breathe somehow, would need to navigate the murky depths and face whatever challenges the mer-people and the tournament organizers had devised. This was no small matter, no simple test of courage. This was a task that could easily end in tragedy. The house elf began to pay closer attention to the professor's conversations, to the whispers among the staff, to anything that might give him insight into how Harry Potter could survive such a challenge. He heard mention of various methods: transfiguration to give oneself gills, the bubblehead charm to create air underwater, potions that would allow temporary aquatic adaptation. But Harry was young, barely trained in such advanced magic, and Dobby worried that the boy would struggle to master these techniques in time. Days passed, and Dobby watched Harry with growing anxiety. The boy looked stressed, burdened by the weight of competition and the hostility of students who believed he had cheated his way into the tournament. Even some of his friends had turned away from him, unable to believe that he had not sought this dangerous glory. Harry walked through the castle with his shoulders hunched, his famous scar hidden beneath worried frowns, and Dobby's heart ached for him. The night before the second task, Dobby could bear it no longer. He had learned, through careful listening and observation, that Harry had still not found a solution to the underwater breathing problem. The boy had been searching frantically through library books, had been practicing charms that seemed beyond his current abilities, had been growing more desperate as the deadline approached. And Dobby, who had access to the professor's conversations, who had heard the staff discussing various solutions, knew of a simple answer that Harry had not discovered: gillyweed, a magical plant that, when eaten, would allow a person to breathe underwater for approximately an hour by causing gills to sprout on their neck and webbing to appear between their fingers. It was perfect for the task ahead, simple to use, requiring no advanced spell work or complicated preparation. Professor Sprout kept gillyweed in the Hogwarts greenhouses, used it in her upper-level herbology classes. All Harry needed was access to this plant, and he would have a fighting chance at surviving the second task. But how could Dobby get gillyweed to Harry without raising suspicion, without revealing that someone had interfered with the tournament? The task was meant to test the champion's own abilities, their resourcefulness and knowledge. Giving Harry the answer directly would be cheating, would potentially disqualify him from the competition. Yet leaving him to fail, to potentially drown in the cold waters of the lake, was unthinkable. Dobby wrestled with this dilemma throughout the evening, his conscience pulling him in different directions. The rules of the tournament mattered, yes, but Harry's life mattered more. The integrity of the competition was important, but not as important as ensuring that the boy who had given Dobby his freedom lived to see another day. And there was something else, something Dobby sensed in the very air around the tournament. A wrongness, a darkness, a suggestion that forces beyond the official challenges were at work. If someone had entered Harry's name to harm him, then helping Harry survive was not cheating, but protection against true villainy. The decision, when Dobby finally made it, brought him both fear and certainty. He would get gillyweed to Harry Potter. He would do it in a way that appeared natural, that allowed Harry to believe he had discovered the solution himself with help from a friend. And he would do it soon, very soon, because time was running out, and Harry Potter needed to know about gillyweed before the task began. Late that night, when the castle slept, and even the portraits dozed in their frames, Dobby made his way to the Gryffindor common room. He could not enter. House elves respected the students' private spaces, but he could wait nearby, could catch Harry's friend Neville Longbottom, who was known to have an interest in herbology, who might know about gillyweed, and could tell Harry about it in a way that seemed like natural help rather than outside interference. But as the night deepened and no one came, as the hours ticked away toward dawn and the task that would begin that very morning, Dobby grew desperate. There was no time for subtle approaches, no time for indirect solutions. Harry Potter needed gillyweed, and he needed it now, and Dobby was the only one who could provide it. The house elf apparated to the greenhouses, his magic allowing him to bypass the wards that would have stopped a wizard. The building was dark and silent, filled with the breathing presence of hundreds of magical plants, some sleeping, some rustling gently in their pots, some whispering secrets to the night. Dobby knew where Professor Sprout kept the gillyweed. He had cleaned these greenhouses many times, had learned the location of every plant and potion ingredient. His hands trembled as he gathered a generous handful of the slimy grey-green plant. This was theft, technically, though he intended to tell Professor Sprout about it later, to confess and accept whatever punishment she deemed appropriate. But Harry's life was worth any punishment, worth any consequence. Dobby tucked the gillyweed carefully into the depths of his clothing, feeling its cold, rubbery texture against his skin, and apparated back toward the castle. The morning of the second task arrived with grey skies and cold wind, the lake's surface rippling with small waves that suggested the depths below were far from calm. Students gathered on the shores, professors prepared the stands where spectators would watch, and champions made their final preparations. Harry stood among them, his face pale, his eyes wide with barely concealed fear. He still had no solution Dobby could see, no plan for surviving an hour underwater. Time was running out. The task would begin within minutes, and Harry Potter would be forced to enter the lake without any way to breathe, would be disqualified or worse, would fail this challenge through no fault of his own, but simply because he was too young, too inexperienced to have learned about gillyweed yet. Dobby found Harry in a corridor near the lake, found him standing alone, while the other champions prepared with confidence, born of knowledge and planning. The house elf's enormous eyes filled with tears as he pressed the gillyweed into Harry's hands, as he explained quickly, urgently, what it was and how to use it. "Eat this just before entering the water," Dobby told him, "and it will let you breathe underwater for about an hour. Trust me, Harry Potter, sir. This will save you." Harry stared at the gillyweed, then at Dobby, understanding and gratitude flooding his face. He tried to thank the house elf, tried to express his appreciation, but there was no time. The task was beginning. The champions were being called to the water's edge, and Harry had to go. He clutched the gillyweed like a lifeline and ran toward the lake, leaving Dobby standing in the corridor, trembling with relief and anxiety, praying to whatever magic governed the world that his gift would be enough. From the stands where the house elves had gathered to watch, for they were curious about the tournament too, even if they would never admit it openly, Dobby witnessed the second task unfold. He saw Harry eat the gillyweed just before diving into the lake, saw the boy's transformation as gills sprouted on his neck and his hands became webbed. He watched as Harry disappeared beneath the surface, as the other champions followed, using their own methods, as the hour began to tick away with agonizing slowness. Dobby could not see what happened in the lake's depths, could not witness Harry's journey through the underwater world, but he felt every minute of that hour like a weight on his chest. He imagined Harry swimming through dark water, searching for whatever had been taken from him, facing creatures and challenges that Dobby could only guess at. The house elf's hands were clasped so tightly that his knuckles showed white, his breath coming in short gasps, his entire being focused on willing Harry Potter to survive, to succeed, to return safely to the surface. The hour passed with terrible slowness, and champions began to emerge. Cedric Diggory broke the surface first, gasping and triumphant, having rescued his friend Cho Chang from the Mer people's captivity. Then came Victor Crumb, transformed partially into a shark, pulling Hermione Granger from the depths. Fleur Delacour had been forced to withdraw, unable to complete the task, but she waited anxiously on the shore for her younger sister to be rescued. And still, Harry did not emerge. The time limit passed, and panic began to spread among the spectators. Had something gone wrong? Had the gillyweed failed? Had Harry Potter, the boy who lived, finally met a challenge he could not survive? Dobby felt his heart shattering with each passing second, felt tears streaming down his face, felt the terrible certainty that he had failed, that his help had not been enough. But then, just when all seemed lost, the lake's surface erupted. Harry emerged, not alone, but with two people, Ron Weasley, who had been taken as the thing Harry would miss most, and Fleur's little sister Gabrielle, whom Harry had refused to leave behind, even though she was not his to rescue. The boy who lived had endangered his own success to save someone else's loved one, had stayed underwater past the time limit because his conscience would not allow him to abandon a child, even an artificial hostage. The crowd erupted in cheers and arguments, judges debating whether Harry should be penalized for being last or rewarded for his moral courage. But Dobby did not care about scores or rankings. Harry was alive. Harry was safe. The gillyweed had worked, and the boy who had given Dobby freedom had survived another deadly challenge. Tears of relief and joy streamed down Dobby's face as he watched Harry being wrapped in blankets, being tended to by Madame Pomfrey, being congratulated and questioned and celebrated. The house elf had saved the day, had provided the crucial help that allowed Harry Potter to survive. It was not the last time Dobby would come to Harry's rescue, not the greatest act of heroism he would perform, but it was significant nonetheless, a demonstration that freedom allowed him to help in ways that servitude never could, that his loyalty to Harry Potter knew no bounds, that he would do whatever was necessary to protect the wizard who had given him the greatest gift of all. Let the world grow quiet around you now, dear listener, as we approach the most profound chapter of Dobby's story. Settle yourself deeper into rest. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm of these words, and prepare yourself for a tale of courage that will shine through the darkness like a beacon of hope. Tonight, we witness Dobby's greatest act of heroism, his final and most important rescue, the moment when a free house elf would prove that love is stronger than any magic, that loyalty can overcome even death itself. The years had passed since the Triwizard Tournament, years that brought shadows lengthening across the wizarding world. Voldemort had returned, just as Harry Potter had warned, rising from the dead like a nightmare given form. The Dark Lord gathered his followers once more, the Death Eaters who had waited in secret for his return, who had hidden their dark allegiances behind respectable facades. And chief among these followers, as always, was Lucius Malfoy, his pale hair and cold eyes marking him as one of Voldemort's most trusted servants. The Second Wizarding War had begun, though many had been slow to acknowledge it. Deaths occurred in mysterious circumstances. Disappearances went unexplained. Fear crept through the magical community, like frost spreading across glass. Hogwarts became a place of increasing tension, with new security measures and whispered conversations, with students looking over their shoulders and professors gathering in worried clusters. Dobby watched it all from the kitchens. his enormous eyes filled with concern, his heart heavy with the knowledge that dark times had come again. Harry Potter, no longer a child, but a young man bearing the weight of prophecy and destiny, had left Hogwarts on a quest that few understood. Dobby heard whispers about it from the portraits, from the ghosts who drifted through the castle walls, from the magical creatures who sensed the shifting tides of power. Harry was searching for something, Horcruxes they were called, pieces of Voldemort's soul hidden in objects of dark magic. The very thought made Dobby shudder. Such evil magic, such deliberate fracturing of one's essence, such determination to achieve immortality at any cost. The house elf continued his work at Hogwarts, but his thoughts were always with Harry Potter, always wondering where the wizard was, whether he was safe, whether he needed help that Dobby could provide. The castle felt emptier without Harry's presence, colder somehow, as though even the stones themselves missed the boy who had defeated Voldemort once and would need to do so again. Then came the spring of 1998, when the war reached its darkest point, when hope seemed furthest away and evil's triumph appeared inevitable. Dobby was in the kitchens, helping prepare a modest meal. For food was scarce now, supplies difficult to obtain, when he felt something. A pull, a magical tug at his consciousness, a distress signal that resonated through the very essence of his being. Someone was calling for help, someone Dobby cared about deeply, someone in terrible danger, Harry Potter. Dobby knew it with absolute certainty, knew it the way he knew his own name, knew it in the place where his magic lived and breathed. Harry Potter needed him, and Dobby would answer that call no matter what it cost. The house elf closed his eyes and focused on that magical pull, using his extraordinary abilities to sense where it came from, to pinpoint the location across the miles that separated them. And what he sensed made his blood run cold. Malfoy Manor. Harry Potter was at Malfoy Manor, the place where Dobby had spent so many years in servitude, the house of his former masters, the headquarters of Voldemort's operations. Harry was a prisoner there, in the dungeons beneath the drawing room, where Dobby had once served tea and endured casual cruelty. Without hesitation, without thought for his own safety, Dobby apparated. The magic carried him across the distance in an instant, folding space and time, delivering him to the cellar of Malfoy Manor, where he had not set foot since the day Harry Potter had freed him. The familiar darkness pressed against him, the cold stone walls that he remembered too well, the sense of oppression that had marked his entire childhood and young adulthood in this terrible place. But Dobby was not the same house elf who had fled this manor years ago. He was free now, bound to no master, able to act according to his own will. And his will was absolute, to save Harry Potter, to rescue his friend from this place of darkness, to prove once and for all that freedom meant the power to choose good over evil, courage over fear, love over hate. The cellar was crowded with prisoners. Harry was there, yes, but also Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, Luna Lovegood, Mr. Ollivander the Wandmaker, and Griphook the Goblin. They were trapped, held captive by Death Eaters, waiting in darkness while terrible things happened in the rooms above. Screams echoed down from the manor. Hermione's screams. She was tortured by Bellatrix Lestrange, that most cruel and sadistic of Voldemort's followers. Dobby materialized in the cellar, and the relief on Harry's face was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The young wizard had been trying to summon help, had been calling out with his mind and magic, hoping against hope that someone would hear, someone would come. And Dobby had heard, had answered, had crossed the boundaries of space itself to reach his friend in this moment of desperate need. But rescue would not be simple. There were many prisoners to save, and the cellar was warded against wizard's magic, designed to prevent exactly this kind of escape. Death Eaters prowled the manor above. Bellatrix was torturing Hermione for information about a sword, and at any moment they might discover that someone was attempting to free the prisoners. Time was running short. Danger pressed from all sides, and Dobby would need every ounce of his considerable magic to save them all. House elf magic, you see, worked differently from wizard magic. It was older, more primal, connected to the essence of service and home and belonging. Wards designed to stop wizards could not stop house elves, who could apparate through protections that would baffle even the most powerful sorcerers. This was Dobby's advantage, the key to the rescue he was about to attempt. Harry spoke quickly, urgently, giving instructions. "Take Luna, Mr. Ollivander, and the goblin first," Harry said. "Take them to Shell Cottage, to Bill Weasley's home on the coast where they would be safe. Then come back for us, for Harry and Ron and the others who remained." Dobby nodded, his large eyes solemn with understanding, and gathered the first group of prisoners close to him. The apparition was difficult. Taking multiple people required tremendous magical effort, especially across such distance. But Dobby was free, and his magic was his own to command, no longer constrained by the bonds of servitude. He focused his will, felt the magic gather around him like a cloak, and disappeared with a crack that echoed off the cellar walls. Shell Cottage appeared around them, a small house perched on a cliff overlooking the sea. Dobby deposited his passengers safely, saw them stumble with relief onto solid ground, and immediately apparated back to Malfoy Manor. There was no time to rest, no time to catch his breath. Harry Potter still needed him, still waited in that terrible cellar, still faced danger from the Death Eaters above. But when Dobby materialized in the cellar the second time, the situation had changed. The Death Eaters had discovered the escape, had come thundering down the stairs with wands drawn and murder in their eyes. Harry and Ron were fighting them, using wands they had somehow acquired, their faces set with desperate determination. Dean Thomas and Griphook, for the goblin had returned to help, were caught in the middle of a magical battle in the confined space of the cellar. Dobby did not hesitate. He had faced his former masters before, had stood up to Lucius Malfoy in a Hogwarts corridor years ago when he first gained his freedom. He would stand up to them again now, would use his magic to protect Harry Potter and his friends, would be the hero that this moment required. The house elf's magic lashed out, disarming Death Eaters, sending them flying, creating chaos that allowed the prisoners to fight back. He grabbed Harry and Ron, pulled them close, prepared to apparate them to safety, just as he had the others. But there were more prisoners now. Dean had to come too, and Griphook, and the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. Above them, Bellatrix Lestrange realized what was happening. She came shrieking down the stairs, her wild eyes blazing with madness and fury, her wand raised to kill. She saw Dobby, recognized her family's former house elf, and her face contorted with rage. How dare a house elf interfere with Death Eater business? How dare a freed slave attack his betters? How dare this insignificant creature attempt to rescue prisoners from Malfoy Manor? Dobby gathered everyone close, felt his magic straining under the weight of so many people, felt the effort of apparating through wards and across distance with such a heavy load. He could feel Harry's arms around him, could hear Ron's labored breathing, could sense the desperation and hope of everyone depending on him to save them. This was it, the moment of rescue, the triumph of good over evil, the proof that a free house elf could change the world. They began to disapparate, the magic pulling them away from Malfoy Manor, carrying them towards safety and light and the sea air of Shell Cottage. But in that final fraction of a second, as reality bent around them and distance collapsed, Bellatrix Lestrange threw her knife, a silver blade that spun through the air, enchanted with dark magic, aimed with the precision born of cruelty and hatred. The knife found its mark. They materialized at Shell Cottage in a heap of bodies and relief, tumbling onto the sand outside the cottage, where waves crashed against the shore and seabirds called in the salt-scented air. For a moment, there was only gratitude and amazement that they had escaped, that Dobby had saved them all, that they were free from Malfoy Manor and the Death Eaters and the torture that had awaited them. But then Harry noticed the blood, the wetness spreading across Dobby's chest, the silver handle of Bellatrix's knife protruding from the small body, the way Dobby's enormous eyes had begun to dim like candles in wind. The house elf had been struck in that final moment of escape, had taken a mortal wound even as he completed the rescue, had traded his life for theirs. Harry caught Dobby as the house elf collapsed, cradled him gently in his arms, and Dobby looked up at the wizard who had given him freedom. There was no fear in those large eyes now, no pain that could overshadow the love and loyalty that filled them. Dobby had saved Harry Potter one last time, had saved all of them, had accomplished the rescue despite the cost to himself. The house elf's final words were simple, profound, a summary of everything he had learned in his years of freedom. "Harry Potter," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the waves. He smiled, that pure and joyful smile that had marked his personality, that had made him unique among house elves. And then, with that smile still on his face, with Harry's arms around him and the sky opening above them, Dobby closed his eyes and died. The grief that tore through Harry Potter in that moment was almost physical in its intensity. This loyal friend, this brave soul who had risked everything again and again to protect him, this house elf who had valued freedom above all things, Dobby was gone. The wizard who had freed him now held his lifeless body, feeling the weight of a death that should never have happened, mourning a friend whose courage had been greater than that of many wizards. They buried Dobby there, on the cliff overlooking the sea, in a grave that Harry Potter dug himself without magic, using his hands and a shovel, needing the physical labor to process his grief. They wrapped the house elf in a clean pillowcase, not as a symbol of servitude, but as a reminder of where he had come from, how far he had traveled, how much he had overcome. And they laid him to rest with his precious sock, the symbol of his freedom, still clutched in his small hands. Above the grave, Harry placed a marker with words that would ensure Dobby was remembered forever. Here lies Dobby, a free elf, not a house elf bound to masters, not a servant defined by his servitude, but a free elf who had chosen his own path, who had lived and died according to his own will, who had saved the day one final time with the ultimate sacrifice. The waves crashed against the shore below, the seabirds called their mournful songs, and the world seemed dimmer for the loss of one small house elf whose heart had been larger than giants, whose courage had surpassed that of the bravest warriors, whose love had been pure enough to change the fate of the wizarding world. The grave overlooking the sea became a place of pilgrimage in the years that followed, though few knew of its existence at first. Shell Cottage stood sentinel above it, Bill and Fleur Weasley's home, a guardian of the resting place of the elf who had saved so many. The marker that Harry Potter had placed, simple, honest, profound, remained undisturbed by time or weather, protected by magic that grew naturally from the love that surrounded this place. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. 5 words that told an entire story, that captured the essence of a life lived courageously, that honored the journey from servitude to liberation. Harry visited the grave often in those first terrible days after Dobby's death. He would stand there as the sun rose over the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and pink, and he would speak to his friend. He told Dobby about the continuing search for Horcruxes, about the plans to defeat Voldemort, about the weight of destiny and the burden of being the chosen one. And though Dobby could not answer, Harry felt a strange comfort in these one-sided conversations, felt as though the house elf's spirit somehow lingered in this place of wind and waves and endless sky. The Battle of Hogwarts came not long after, that terrible and magnificent confrontation when the forces of good and evil clashed within the castle's ancient walls. Harry fought with Dobby's sacrifice fresh in his mind, with the memory of the house elf's courage strengthening his own resolve. When he faced Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, when he walked willingly to what he thought was his death, Harry carried with him the lesson that Dobby had taught, that some things are worth dying for, that love is stronger than fear, that choosing to protect others is the highest form of magic. And when Harry survived, when he returned from death itself to defeat Voldemort once and for all, when the Dark Lord fell and the wizarding world was freed from his shadow, Harry thought of Dobby. The house elf had not lived to see this victory, had not witnessed the triumph of the cause he had served so faithfully. But his contribution had been essential. Without Dobby's rescue at Malfoy Manor, Harry and his friends would have died in those dungeons, and Voldemort would have won. Everything that came after the destruction of the final Horcruxes, the rallying of resistance, the ultimate defeat of evil, all of it had been made possible by a house elf's courage and sacrifice. In the peaceful years that followed the war, as the wizarding world healed and rebuilt, Harry Potter ensured that Dobby's story was told. He spoke of the house elf in interviews, in the accounts he gave to historians documenting the war, in conversations with young witches and wizards who needed to understand that heroism wore many faces. He told them about a house elf who had risked everything to warn him, who had provided gillyweed when no one else could help, who had died saving his friends from certain death. But Dobby's legacy extended far beyond the stories told about him. His life and death sparked conversations about house elf rights that had been ignored for too long. Questions about the ethics of servitude, about the ancient magic that bound an entire species to servitude. Hermione Granger, who had always championed house elf welfare, found new allies in her cause after the war. She worked tirelessly within the Ministry of Magic to improve conditions for house elves, to offer them choices about their employment, to ensure that those who wish for freedom could achieve it without shame. The changes came slowly. Centuries of tradition could not be overturned overnight, but they came nonetheless. Some wizarding families began to pay their house elves modest wages, to offer them days off, to treat them with greater respect and dignity. It was not universal, and many traditional pure-blood families resisted these changes with fierce determination. But the seed had been planted. Dobby had shown that house elves could be more than servants, that they deserved recognition as beings with their own desires and rights, that freedom was not something to fear, but something to celebrate. At Hogwarts, where Dobby had found his home in freedom, his memory was honored in quiet but meaningful ways. The house elves in the kitchens spoke of him with a mixture of confusion and reluctant admiration. They still did not fully understand his choices, still thought his desire for wages had been strange, but they could not deny that he had been happy, that his work had been exemplary, that his loyalty to Harry Potter had been absolute. Even Winky, who had struggled so long with her own dismissal, eventually found a measure of peace, and she credited Dobby's patient friendship with helping her survive those dark times. The students who had known Dobby, who had encountered him in the kitchens or heard his enthusiastic praise of Harry Potter, remembered him fondly. They told younger students about the free elf who wore mismatched socks and spoke of his freedom with pride, who had saved Harry Potter multiple times, who had died a hero's death. These stories became part of Hogwarts lore, woven into the castle's rich tapestry of history, alongside tales of famous wizards and great battles. A small plaque was placed in the kitchens, near the spot where Dobby had worked with such joy and dedication. It bore his name and the dates of his service, and beneath that a simple phrase: he chose freedom and used it well. The house elves polished this plaque daily, keeping it gleaming, and though they might not have understood everything Dobby represented, they honored him as one of their own who had done something extraordinary. Harry Potter, as he grew older and had children of his own, made sure that his sons and daughter knew about Dobby. He took them to Shell Cottage, to the grave overlooking the sea, and he told them the full story of the house elf who had saved his life again and again. He wanted them to understand that greatness was not determined by species or status, that courage could be found in the most unexpected places, that the measure of a person or an elf was not their power, but their choices. His children listened with wide eyes as Harry described Dobby's warning at Privet Drive, the gift of Gillyweed, the final rescue at Malfoy Manor. They learned that their father, the famous Harry Potter, who had defeated Voldemort, owed his life to a house elf who had never wielded a wand, who had been considered property by most of the wizarding world, who had been small in stature but immense in spirit. And they carried these lessons forward, treating all beings with respect, understanding that dignity was not something to be earned, but something inherent in every living creature. Ron Weasley and Hermione Granger also kept Dobby's memory alive. Ron, who had been skeptical of house elves' desire for freedom at first, had learned through Dobby's example that his assumptions had been wrong. He supported Hermione's efforts to improve house elf conditions, and he spoke of Dobby with genuine affection and gratitude. Hermione's work within the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, which she eventually renamed the Department for Magical Being Relations, was directly inspired by Dobby's story. She fought for laws that would give house elves more protections, that would make their servitude more of a choice and less of an absolute bondage. The other prisoners that Dobby had rescued from Malfoy Manor never forgot him either. Luna Lovegood, in her dreamy but profound way, suggested that Dobby had become something like a guardian spirit, watching over those who fought for freedom and justice. Mr. Ollivander, the wand maker who had suffered so terribly in captivity, spoke of Dobby with reverence, marveling that a being without a wand had wielded more powerful magic than most wizards could imagine. Dean Thomas carried the memory of that rescue with him always, a reminder that help could come from the most unexpected sources. As the years passed and became decades, Dobby's story took on an almost mythical quality. New generations of witches and wizards learned about the house elf who had defied his masters, who had warned Harry Potter despite terrible punishment, who had died saving the Chosen One and his friends. Children's books were written about him, though Harry insisted they be accurate rather than overly sanitized. He wanted young witches and wizards to understand both the joy of Dobby's freedom and the tragedy of the system that had bound him for so long. The grave by the sea remained a place of quiet power. Visitors came, not many, for its location was not widely known, but enough to ensure that Dobby was not forgotten. They left small offerings sometimes, socks, of course, in every color and pattern imaginable, a tribute to the symbol of Dobby's freedom. Flowers that bloomed even in winter, sustained by magic and love. Notes of gratitude from house elves who had found the courage to ask for better treatment, who credited Dobby's example with giving them hope. The waves continued their eternal rhythm against the shore below, and the wind carried the salt smell of the ocean across the cliff top. Seabirds nested nearby, their cries a constant song that seemed to honor the elf who rested there. In spring, wildflowers grew around the grave. No one planted them. They simply appeared, as though the earth itself wished to celebrate Dobby's resting place. In summer, the sun warmed the stone marker until it glowed golden in the afternoon light. In autumn, leaves from distant trees somehow found their way here, settling gently like blessings. And in winter, even when snow covered the ground, the grave remained somehow peaceful, serene, a place of rest that felt almost sacred. Harry Potter visited less frequently as he aged, as the demands of life and family and work consumed his time, but he never forgot. On the anniversary of Dobby's death each year, he made the journey to Shell Cottage, stood before that simple grave, and spoke his gratitude aloud. "Thank you," he would say, "for everything. Thank you for the warnings, for the gillyweed, for the rescue. Thank you for your friendship, for your loyalty, for your enormous heart. Thank you for showing me that freedom matters, that every being deserves dignity, that love is the strongest magic of all." And though Dobby could not answer, though the house elf's voice had been silenced by death, Harry always felt that somehow his words were heard, that somehow Dobby knew he was remembered, that somehow the elf spirit continued to exist in the love of those he had saved and the legacy he had left behind. The wizarding world had changed because of Dobby, slowly but surely, in ways both large and small. More house elves worked under contracts now, receiving wages and days off, treated with greater respect by their employers. The idea that house elves were mere property had begun to fade, replaced gradually by the understanding that they were sentient beings deserving of rights and dignity. It was not a complete transformation. Many families still clung to the old ways, still kept house elves in traditional servitude. But the conversation had shifted, and Dobby's name was invoked whenever people spoke of house elf rights and freedom. In the grand tapestry of magical history, Dobby's thread was small but brilliant, a flash of gold against darker colors, a reminder that heroism was not the sole province of powerful wizards, that the smallest beings could change the course of events through courage and love. He had saved Harry Potter, yes, but he had also saved something larger. He had saved the idea that freedom was possible, that change could happen, that the old ways were not immutable law, but traditions that could and should be questioned. And so we come to the end of our story, dear listener, to the quiet close of a tale that began with a warning in a muggle bedroom and ended with a grave overlooking the sea. Dobby's life was not long. House elves could live for centuries, but Dobby's freedom lasted only a handful of years before death claimed him. Yet in that brief time, he accomplished more than most beings achieve in lifetimes stretching across generations. He taught Harry Potter about loyalty and sacrifice. He showed the wizarding world that house elves were more than servants. He proved that freedom, however brief, was worth any price. He demonstrated that love freely given was stronger than any compulsion, any magical bond, any dark curse. He saved the day, again and again, not with powerful spells or ancient magic, but with courage and determination and a heart so large it could barely fit inside his small chest. Rest now, dear listener, and let Dobby's story settle into your heart like a blessing. Let his courage inspire your dreams. Let his loyalty warm you like a gentle fire. Let his love for Harry Potter remind you that the greatest magic in the world is the magic of caring for others more than you care for yourself. Dobby lived free and died free, and in doing so, he became immortal, not in body, but in memory, in legacy, in the lives he touched and the world he changed. The sea continues its song below the cliff top. The stars shine above in their eternal patterns, and somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, between memory and dream, Dobby's spirit endures. He is remembered, he is honored, he is loved. And that, dear listener, is the greatest legacy any being could hope for. To be remembered not for power or wealth or status, but for kindness, for courage, for love. Sleep deeply now, and let this final image carry you into dreams. A small grave on a cliff top, waves crashing below, stars wheeling overhead, and on the marker, these simple, perfect words. Here lies Dobby, a free elf. An elf who saved the day, who changed the world, who proved that the smallest among us can be the greatest heroes of all. Dream of Dobby's joy in freedom. Dream of his courage in danger. Dream of his love for Harry Potter that transcended species and status and even death itself. And when you wake, carry his lesson forward, that every being deserves dignity, that freedom is sacred, that love is the strongest magic in all the world. Good night, dear listener. Sleep softly, peacefully, wrapped in the warmth of Dobby's story, protected by the memory of his enormous heart. May your dreams be gentle, your rest complete, and may you wake refreshed, carrying with you always the knowledge that heroism lives in unexpected places, that kindness changes the world, and that love, pure, selfless, eternal love, never truly dies. Rest well, and let Dobby's legacy be your lullaby, singing you into the deepest, most peaceful sleep. Good night.